Good evening, viewers, and welcome to this rather special show on an extraordinary man. A man who, in many ways, is the philosophical kernel of our times, an icon beyond imagination. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with Anshul Chaturvedi, who is an editor with the Times of India, but more importantly, a man who has ceaselessly, tirelessly worked on Swami Vivekananda to profile the man for all of us in language which is simple, alluring, and insightful. It takes a lot of research and a lot of courage to talk about any icon in our country, because obviously people have views that they've already established, views that have been framed. Sometimes history colors them in different hues. But what was extraordinary about Anshul's book, which I had the privilege and pleasure to read early on, was the delightful way in which certain myths that we would associate with icons are bust, especially someone like Swami Vivekananda. Welcome, Anshul, to this special show on Kahali. And thank you for being here. And let's start by asking you, of all the things you've done, and you've done a lot, why Vivekananda?
Suhel, it's not a conscious call. It's not like that I actually, went and picked him out of something which I would have otherwise, taken as a sheet anchor. Vivekananda is somebody I discovered was playing a very key role in the way I thought in retrospect. At the moment I took those calls, at the moment I began to pick him up, and the moments of crisis or conflict in my life, when he turned out to be somebody, who could give me the answer to my questions, it just kept happening. And it was maybe, maybe starting at around 16, 17-ish. And it was only around 30 that I began to realize that, how come all the time? And this happened in a sense, when somebody gave me Stephen Covey to read, The 7 Habits. And so the first thing I realized was, okay, Dale Carnegie says, okay, be the guy the other guy wants you to be. But Stephen says, no, you stay what you are. The character ethic versus the personality ethic. And I said, I've read this, boss. I already read this, the whole point. And then so I wrote something, The Manager Monk. That, okay, I think this is a guy who answers workplace questions, which did not seem, intuitive. Why would a man who's never run a corporation answer workplace questions? For that, you read the guys who run, the big CEOs of the world. And then each time, something pushed a button and I needed an answer. Every single time I ended up coming back. So in the last few weeks, when people have spoken, I said, like my agony aunt, my Dale Carnegie, Stephen Covey, life coach, all rolled into one, became one person. And it was about 6-8 years back that I first thought that, maybe instead of just writing small articles, 350 words, maybe I could sum up. And I wrote a piece about 10 years back for the Speaking Tree, which was about how he answered multiple questions and enabled me to stay 17 mentally, still defiant. And then sort of some people, made the point that maybe you want to write this in a longer format. And I said, look, this is too complex a topic. This man is too sharp, and his English is too sharp. That's the problem. You can't outwrite him. He writes so well. To write about him, you don't want to get that space. You'll always look stupid. But the idea kept coming back. And I tried to structure it in a few ways. And I spoke to some people. And sometimes I was told, this is getting too much about you. It should be more about the man's greatness. I said, he doesn't need me to endorse his greatness. He's above that. So, but when the book did come out, a friend of mine said, you took him off the calendar hanging behind me. Because he's out there. Like, he's not somebody I refer to. I just, oh, he's a great man. And great men, we don't apply them to our lives because they're too great. They're practically great. This person is practically great. So what I've just done is to attempt to explain to people how he actually answered questions, because religion irritates young people. But it should not. And the way he addresses it did not irritate me when I was a teenager. So the effort was to go back these 30 odd years and say, look, this is a constant thought. At 17, I thought it made sense. At 47, I think it makes sense. And I'm a cynic. I don't hero worship. So if he stood the test of time, maybe you want to see why he worked for me. Maybe he might work for you. It was as unambitious as that.
So let's go back to when you were 16, 17. What was that trigger? Were you missing something in life? Were you preparing for the future? Therefore, you wanted to be sure what you were doing, what you were thinking would prepare you for that future? Because a lot of people, and I'm from Calcutta, Bengal is the home to Swami Vivekananda. Our introduction to him was much earlier in terms of chronology.
Right.
Our introductions were at about age 4 or 5. If you ever went to Dakshineshwar, you went to Ramakrishna mission, blah, blah, blah. But for you, at 16, 17, it's interesting. So why at that inflection point?
I think the one word is fear, Suhel. Because I was one of those nerds. I mean, reasonably good at academics, but somebody who you could never put in front of a stage. Somebody not the outdoorsy guy, and somebody who was an introvert. So that's one part. It's not wrong to be an introvert. But the number of things that, got you defensive, scared, apprehensive, there was a large list of them. And in about a year after I began getting a reference point of this person, I began to do a self-diagnosis. Because he would always, flag out fear as the greatest sin. And that seemed a very radical thought, that if you are afraid, and that's how you generally live, and what is the fear? Fear is of course, peer pressure, self-esteem. Then, small things you think about. If you sit down at night and you look at the stars or whatever, and you just philosophical mood, and mentally you realize that, okay, what I read yesterday in class, so this star is, it's not here. It used to be here 30 years back. The light is coming 30 years later. So you say, okay, another 30, 50, 60 years, there might be stars whose lights comes here after we are dead. Our lifespan isn't even big enough to cover the journey of light coming to this planet. Or when you read other stuff, you read something like, Samuel Johnson talking about the point that that friendship between two people can be entered into on no other terms than one must at some point mourn for the other.
Yes.
And then you read about the Buddha and his 4 questions. And they're very basic questions, but they do frighten you sometimes. Is disease inevitable? Is death inevitable? And what is death? As a teenager, what is death to you? Like, if you think about it, it's a scary thought, because you see people around you. It's not that everybody lives to 90. It's a class fellow lost her vision from accident. And, in class 11th or 12th, to have somebody lose their eyesight, it's stunningly scary. And doctors can't do anything. So, all that makes you think, like, this life is such a risky damn space, right? Physically, you're so vulnerable. You're so vulnerable. And emotionally, you're looking on to other people, especially in teenage, you're looking on to other people to give a support system. I didn't want that. That is very vulnerable, because everybody else decides how you are feeling, how you're thinking. So I wanted to stay here, and he gave me the buffer that, yes, you can be by yourself. And you can be fine. You can be okay and be less fearful. I mean, none of us can be completely fearless, but less apprehensive and less afraid of losing things. And at that point, how much do you have anyway?
No, it's interesting you mentioned that. You've talked about Samuel Johnson, you talked about Stephen Covey, 7 Hat. I mean, my point is, what all were you reading at that time? And you were reading quite a body of disparate work. And from all of that, Vivekananda shone out. He was the one who stood out, and you made him the guiding light or the buffer, or what I would say the life whisperer, not the horse whisperer, but the life whisperer, who told you things in simple, nuanced ways, which were important for you to hear or important for you to understand. So why him? How did he suddenly, emerge the front runner in your thought cycle?
There's no rationality, so it's almost like music. Which song did you like? Now, why I liked it is difficult to answer, but I liked it. Also, I realized, Suhel, that, what you consume in popular media, the other things that you relate to versus philosophy, they rarely match.
Correct.
You go to consume popular media for a very different space, and then you consume philosophy, which is supposed to be deep, dark, and you're supposed to take ages to figure it out. But there were so many moments, and I was mentioning the point the other day to someone that I always liked old films. Now, when I read Vivekananda, it's still sort of, fermenting in my mind, still settling in. I haven't absorbed the thought, I have read a thought. But when I see Gurudat saying, "Ye duniya agar mil bhi jaye to kya hai?" It comes back, okay, I do not, this world is not such a happy place, not such an important place that I want to live, assured of everything. Let things go. If Devanand starts off, right, in Hum Dono, बर्बादियों का जश्न मनाता चला गया.
Correct.
I'm saying, hello, this guy says, if you have lost, don't worry about it, big deal. What is the value of things that you have in any case? And his obsession, the way I started the book, right, at one point, not caring for human help. So I'm sure you would have heard when Sajda first came out, Lata and Jaggi together for the first time. And you put it on, it's a very expensive CD. And आदमी को क्या देगा? जो भी देगा वही खुदा देगा. So all that began to merge, that this guy makes sense to me. What I relate to in popular culture, he's already told me beforehand. He's not somebody out of my life. He's right very much there.
Were you some kind of a... See, Anshul, I'm trying to understand the human being that Anshul is, not just for myself, for all of us, for all people who are watching, but also, therefore, what the triggers were. And it's very interesting you mentioned Pyasa. It's A, my favorite film. B, I've had the privilege and the honor of knowing Wahida ji, and I've always discussed that. It was also the film for which Sahid Ludhianvi was banned by Nehru. Ye kuche, ye galiyan. Now, for a lot of people, it's a very dark film. It's a film of defeatism. It's a film, and you use the word that, oh, I'm a cynic for yourself. It's one of, for a lot of external people, it's cynicism, but actually it's about the realities of life. Those were the realities. The same realities that were mirrored in Waqt. They were very similar realities. So I'm saying, at the time that you were growing up, what was the ecosystem that surrounded you? Now, I'm a great believer that in my life, my parents and British Council, in that order, played a great role. My parents would encourage me to read, and British Council to be available for me to read. But then obviously I read a particular genre in the British Council and the rest outside. What was your ecosystem when you were growing up, which fired you to be who you are?
I think I broke out of the ecosystem because of Vivekananda. I don't think it brought me to him. My ecosystem was, I was the son of an IPS officer. I had guards in my house. I had, you know how the bureaucracy is, right? So, and in fact, at some points, you begin to, have a slightly inflated sense of yourself because you are surrounded by men in uniform, men in guns. There's certain body language which you have as a teenager. And I recall there were moments when, something would be happening. Let's say you're driving on a highway and some vehicle is overtaking the convoy. In Kashmir, police systems, multiple vehicles, all of that, the paraphernalia, sirens. And sometimes there was this, inside you would feel, oh my God, I'm so important. We are, doing this, the road is being cleared for us, etc., etc. You pause and say, you're the only guy here who's done nothing in this entire cavalcade. Everybody's at least earned a job. So why are you being so cocky about it? And how do I put it? The reflex of being, in that space, it makes you think that you're slightly superior. And also it's a conventional, see, a government service system is, okay, you expect the child to also get into government service, stuff like that. It's a whole funda, family discussions as such. I think I would have been a very standardized middle class product. And there's nothing wrong in that. But I thought he sort of made me step off from that, cut out. Don't count yourself as son of, etc., etc. Move out. What are you? And if you aren't, very much work on yourself. And many of the things I thought beyond that stage came from that contradiction. Because one thing I've written in the book, so it's not relevant to Vivekananda's philosophy, but I've said, in India, when you ask a kid, including when I was asked, "Tum bade hokar kya banoge?" It's a visiting card question. "Tum naukri kya karoge?" That's the question. "Tum kya banoge?" What is that? Your tum is your doctorate, your engineering, your civil services. That is it. You are nothing else. So if you fail in that, you have failed. You have no more tum left.
That's excellent.
I wanted to not so. I am not under somebody who lives under the illusion that okay, if you become a journalist or a professor, you're intellectual. If you become somebody wearing khaki or green, you have become brave. If you wear a doctor's coat, you have become compassionate. That's not true. That's a visiting card. So even in work philosophy, he served those questions because people say, "Oh my God, you must have something very fancy on your CV to be a fancy person." I can have very unfancy things on my CV, but what am I? मैं क्या बनूंगा? He broke that question out. नौकरी क्या करोगे और तुम क्या बनोगे are two different things when I see it from his worldview. That's how I interpret it.
So interesting. Now we're getting closer to the first part that I wanted to seek answers from. What was version 1.0 Anshul Chaturvedi and what was version 2.0? And the version 2.0 could be still work in progress.
It is very much.
But
what
was the before Vivekananda and after Vivekananda? What were the 1, 2, 3 things that you saw in yourself change or aspire for? Even if it is not a massive change, little change, what could that have been?
It's a big thing to say for that age, but I fear death less.
So it made you more neutral towards the concept of dying.
Yeah.
In the sense, you weren't worried about dying. You were worried about doing a lot more in life than worry about dying. Is that what you're saying?
No, not even that. I'm saying I was worried about the fact, okay, if as in when I die, I don't want to die painfully and miserably. I don't want to be, half crushed by a truck and die out on the road in 6 hours. So that I don't want even right now. When the submarine goes down, I'm petrified. How did people survive there once it, broke up? And you read about war and you see so many of those stories. Miserable, horrendous deaths happen. So death is, but the point that, again, as a normal conversational model, we discourage the discussion about death, right? Especially for children. If I say you will die or I will die, that's not polite conversation. But that's the only fact. Everything else is speculation.
Yeah, that's the only certainty.
Somebody says कि अरे ये बात करना अशुभ है. इसकी बात अभी मत करो. And then I read about how Vivekananda finally, passed away. And I said, how do you get there? And the whole Ashub part stepped out. Because there are two things. See, one, it's something bad. Secondly, it means you are finished. So he said, oh, there's nothing bad about it. Living here is relevant till such time it educates you.
Correct.
Otherwise, what is the point? And secondly, he said, people in the West ask me, is there life after death? And he says, I laugh. How can you have such a question? I have been there earlier and I will be there later. So the two things that as and when this ends, it's not a void. And he explained it in so many places, in so many clear ways. As opposed to, like people who say, "Arey beta, tum bade hoge, tum samajh jaoge." मैंने कहा मैं बड़ा होऊंगा कि इसकी क्या गारंटी है? अभी समझाओ. Correct. तो वो नहीं मिलता था जवाब. So what structured religion did not teach me, and what structured middle-class upbringing told me, let's not talk about death. It's not a good thing. And my counter question used to be, at least in my mind, you won't say it in public in relatives, कि अगर मरना अशुभ है, तो हमारी तो पिछली 300 पुश्तें सब मर चुकी हैं. अशुभता बहुत घर में रहती है. Every generation died in our house, तो हम क्या अशुभ फैमिली हो गए? आगे भी यही होगा. So when the way this man approached death, it is bizarre. I mean, obviously you've read the points. He began saying, I have X time left. I have 3 to 4 years left. I am on my way out. Stuff like that. So you read about this theoretically. You read about some monk going away and saying, I'll fast, till the day I move on. But a guy who's doing work, who's writing fluent English, who's going and lecturing people and mentally saying, my time is about to come in 3 to 4 years. And then till the very day of his passing away. So I made the point earlier that in other people's lives, you find living aspirational, but they're afraid of death. This man died aspirational at 39. At 39, if I or you had to go, we would say, damn, kuch nahi kiya zindagi mein. But kuch karna is not the point. So it's not that, okay, I will live life to the fullest and I will, accumulate great amounts of money and profiling. Not that. You start with saying death is the only certainty. And usually death brings panic and fear and misery. When Irfan first told me that he's been diagnosed, I said to my son, I must not crumble in the face of this. If I have to go, I must go with dignity, not like a crying, namby-pamby. That thought that this will come, the day it comes, will it frighten the hell out of me? If somebody says you got a week left, you got a year left. So that was the point to take away from him. Understand, maybe, and I still don't know how it happened, the day it will happen, will I be able to walk the talk? But when people around me pass away, at least when my mother passed away, I have a reference point. This is not about me. This can't be made about me. And somebody wrote to him saying, my father has died and I really wish he was here. And he said, your father has taken away a garment he was wearing and you should wish he does not have to wear it again. Because being reborn is not so aspirational. Let him be out of the circle. That's better. And that's not how we think, right? If you lose somebody, we say, I wish 7 janam ho, 12 janam ho, 100 janam ho. So he changed the way you look at life and death, at least for me. And I'm still working on that, but that's the broad essence of it.
So interesting. So all of these things came into your being, into your ecosystem. And then from 17 onwards, you were living alongside with Swami Vivekananda, in a manner of speaking.
True. Yeah.
He was in your zehen, he was in your mind, he was in your soul, he was impacting your thoughts perhaps at some time. When did the trigger be pulled for writing about him? Because, and the reason why I ask is because of what you said initially. When you're so close to the person who has been so inspirational and life-altering, you don't know when to move away and how you can write about him, because yes, in many ways, you're also writing about yourself because you're intertwined. So how did that inflection point happen?
I was edgy about it. I was not very certain about it for a while because, like I said, it's like you don't want to play, a practice tennis match with Federer or Djokovic. You want to look like a bad player. So it's better to, stay out and not talk too much about things you can't really master. Secondly, also the point was that, he's written about 1,000 things. He's written about 1,000 dimensions of those things. The Shastras and the Vedas and the Puran. And I mean, the collected volumes are what? So many thousands of pages.
So many, yeah.
And that's not a space which engaged me. And so I thought, is it relevant to convey something about him without having been a scholar about him? Because there are scholars. And there are endless scholars and people have written biographies of him and profiled him and all of that. And then I said to myself, I mean, I may be wrong in the theory. I said, if Hirani could mainstream Gandhi briefly, he took one segment. He said, not responding to violence with violence or abrasiveness with abrasiveness. And so then policemen began giving roses to defaulters as the Gandhigiri became popular. Even in a very small way. If he talks about Gandhigiri and we begin to consider for a minute that do we always need to respond to violence with violence? And if the thought stays in the mind, that does not mean I also have to profile why Gandhi drank goat's milk. That's not relevant. I don't really have to go into a relationship with Kasturba or whether he is a good father or not. That's not relevant to understanding Gandhigiri as non-violence. So you can take away, right? From a library, you can pick a book which you like. You don't have to buy the whole library. So I said, what worked for me is the practicality of this. And even today, and so in a sense, I think maybe at some point I said, if I would say to people, you should read about him because he's very practical. They would say, recommend me a book. And I couldn't find a book like that. So I said, maybe I'll write the book, I'll recommend it to you. It's somehow started from that. Even if it's not grand at scale, but maybe the book will then make you read more what he's written himself. So it's that sort of a stepping point that if people are here and they say, oh, Vivekananda is great, man. He writes very dense things. I don't think I'll get what he says, so I won't read it. Like people say about the Gita, right? It's very complex. So a not so complex, that small boat which pulls a big ship. to the last point. That's sort of the thing I said, maybe I'll try. And frankly, I didn't expect that it would connect with too many people, if you ask me. My duty is done the day I wrote the copy and left it. But I somehow realized that people seem to think it makes sense. And I'm honestly surprised because it's just a personal journey.
No, I've read the book. My whole thing is, its acceptance says a lot about who we are. It means there was a reluctance, perhaps because we think that, what he wrote was very dense or what he wrote was very, complex. But obviously, there's a need for that philosophical intervention in our lives. Because our lives are, to use the Hindi word, neeras, of that cerebral input. और हम चले जा रहे हैं कि भाई ठीक है, अब वही है जो लोग प्रेमचंद नहीं पढ़ते. Or the same people who say Shakespeare, oh, yeah, too tough. Although Shakespeare, to my mind, is the finest psychologist that ever walked the earth. Why do you think we as a nation, we as a people, we as a culture, we as a community neglected Vivekananda for so long? What could be the reason?
You'll get me into trouble.
No, there's no political. See, we don't care about the politics. I'm saying I have my reason. So let me listen to yours. Why do you think? Was it because he was a Hindu icon and people felt that, oh, there'd be a Hindutva factor coming in? What could possibly be the reasons?
Suhel, see, Vivekananda's relevance or lack of relevance is not something which is something of the last 7 to 10 years.
Correct.
When I began reading Vivekananda, VP Singh was in power. Big deal. It's not that my friend circle would care about who the PM is if I said I'm reading Vivekananda. Because being religious is not cool in a teenager. Now, being religious is perhaps cooler than it used to be. But again, what is being religious? Now, if I completely leave aside my personal, perspectives on him, what he wrote, and I'm sure you would have read other stuff which he's written, he has been so hard sometimes on us, on Indians ourselves.
Absolutely.
That the heights in which we preach things and the manner in which we execute them, there is a large gap. And when he would go to the West, he would tell us, learn from them as well. He did not go to America or Britain and come back and say, we are the greatest, they are morons and they are, whatever. He said, learn this from them, learn practicality from them. Of course, it's not that he's hard on everybody. So the word we use is tough love, right? Or hard love or whatever. So he is uncomfortable in some ways. He does not play to your what you want things to be. And the way he wrote, those are lines which I've highlighted. If somebody said to him, it's not that the Orthodoxy liked him very much either. Let's not be confused in that part. He was not some icon of the religious Orthodoxy when he was there. When he came back from America, the priest at Dakshineshwar said he's crossed the 7 seas, he's lost caste, he shouldn't be allowed inside.
Lost caste, correct.
So what more surrealism can you expect? But that also tells you, Suhel, that the Orthodoxy don't always understand religion. They think Vivekananda is not good enough for them. So he wrote and he said, I have perspectives. And he said, I will not Christianize them or Hinduize them. I will Maiize them, and that is all. So, and from where does he come to say it? And then you read about him. So this is not what I thought at 17, but this is what I thought at 37. And when you step back, distance yourself. And I'm saying the last how many hundreds of years, well, everybody talks about God and philosophy and religion, and everybody has strong views. He had a very simple question to anybody who told him, I am a Jnani. He said, have you seen God? Let's start with that. And apart from Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Suhel, who has had the audacity to say yes to that in the last 200 years in this country?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he learned from that man. So,
who, by the way, it's so interesting to have this conversation with you. I'm reminded so much, I'm getting goosebumps as I speak. I don't know if I mentioned, when I was growing up in Calcutta, the most prestigious debate was the Ramakrishna Mission debate. And I must have been in class 9 or 10. And with the grace of God or whatever, won the debate. And I then became, I can't say a friend, but he became an acquaintance. And till he lived, whenever I would call on him. Whenever I could, I would call on him, was Swami Lokeswarananda, who was the secretary of the Ramakrishna Mission. a giant of a man, compassionate to the core. And it's interesting, you mentioned this in the beginning of our conversation, you just touched upon it now. He said religion is private.
Yes.
But your thoughts are public. Your thoughts could fall within the domain of religion or not. If you religionize them, you are not doing anything harmful. You are establishing identity. कि भाई ये मेरी आइडेंटिटी है, मैं हिंदू हूं. अब कहावत है कि गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू, गर्व से कहो हम सिख हैं, ईसाई हैं, जो भी है, तो वो आपको डिफाइन करता है. But that doesn't mean it fences you. So I still remember him using a phrase saying, religion is not a moat. It doesn't constrict you. It allows you the freedom of thought. But if you believe that you want to be controlled, you can erect a moat every day around you. So to my mind, Vivekananda was a humanist before anything else. Please understand, he and Jamshedji Nasarwanji Tata, while talking on the ship moving towards England, they discussed the formation of the Indian Institute of Science, which then became the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. So he was a giant of a man, even in terms of his thinking. You would have expected him to tell Jamshedji Tata to erect temples or no. He said, you must create an institute of science in India. So to go back, when you wrote and when you write on a man like him, the difficult part is not what to include. The difficult part is what to exclude. What do you want the book not to be?
I didn't want the book to be a collective journey. Like you said, religion is private. The book is not about we, it's about me. And individual personal religion can be very different from collectively practiced faith.
Correct.
And I remember reading Vivekananda saying to people, and he's talking about churches, and he said, in my country, coming to Sunday church is not really a big thing, because in my country, the man who goes to a temple is not seen as more religious than the man who does not. In fact, the man who does not go to temple seen as more religious sometimes, because religion is between man and God. And maybe a wife may not know what her husband believes in philosophically. So in that sense, and see again, Suhel, Vivekananda has sometimes modified his tone to the audience he's addressing, as anybody who's conveying a message will do. Also, secondly, his thinking has progressed over time. So, and he acknowledges that as he writes. So sometimes he says, 10 years back, I thought this. Now I think this. The older I grow, I think this. This I would not do. I mean, there's a line which I put in the book when he said, in my 20s, I would not walk on the theater side of the street in Calcutta. And in my 30s, I can live in a house with prostitutes and never say a word of reproach to them. Is this that I can no longer see even? Or is it because I'm broadening into the larger world view that everybody is part of the same entity? And a thought which came to me once in a while, that when he goes to America or when he goes to Britain, Britain that point is your political master.
Correct.
But politically he is maybe part of a structure, but mentally he's not a slave. As an individual, he is free. And equally, he is not somebody who's coming with angst in his heart. He doesn't go to America and say, you people, you white race people who have colonized my country. He says, brothers and sisters. So he managed to live through without angst, without regret, without combat, without conflict. And so everybody sees him as a man of great intellect and thought, which I think he definitely is. But I think sometimes we miss that he's a man of immense compassion. And maybe because we think, when somebody is 70, 80, 90, and we have, that whole halo, then we say, oh, compassion man. And somebody's 30s, you say, oh, energetic guy. You don't think of him as big heart. You think as great mind. But he was very big in that space. Having said that, all these topics, they tend to have conflicting perspectives. And I'm not interested in raising a debate. I'm not equipped to raise a debate on him. My simple take is, see, I'm not a CEO, so when I made the point multiple times, why should you read a book which I have written? And the answer there for me is that when Schwarzenegger writes a book about fitness, it's not going to work for me because, his body, I'm not going to get there. Can I have a normal person tell me about getting slightly fitter from where I am? It's like that. So this is about living the everyday life, what I call the ATM, PTM life. It's about having the usual hassles. It's not being otherworldly. And what comes to you? I mean, see, when my pet dies, Suhel, that day, do I care who the RBI governor is?
No.
I have to handle that loss that day, and I cry in the room by myself. I don't care who won how many Olympic medals the day my mother died. And tomorrow, if somebody pulls a plug on me and says, you will have a week left, I will not be discussing climate change. I will say, I finish, and then what happens? So I need my answers. Our answers don't suffice my answers, if you know what I mean.
So it's interesting because many writers in the world, many well-known writers, many not so well-known writers, when asked this question, have said that I wrote this book for myself. I mean, it could have been a diary which wasn't ever going to be published, or it could have been something which was published. Yours is published. And I think when I read the book, it came across as literally what you say on the cover. It's a handbook. It's a guide. But it's also a guide for those who want to be guided. Those who don't want to be guided can just read it and keep it aside. So in many ways, the book doesn't compel you to think in a particular manner. It doesn't force itself upon you. It doesn't force an idea because you're sharing what you think. What do you feel?
Anybody who understands Vivekananda Suhel cannot force the idea.
Correct.
Because that is idiocy. It is giving to yourself the illusions of greatness. I harbor no such illusions. Because this man taught me that the vanity of ego, the morality of being superior intellectually and morally, that's incurable, He used a word for the missionaries in America who would say, oh, you heathen from India, etc. And he used the word, the hard-shelled Christians don't like me, the rest love me. So I don't want to be this hard-shelled philosopher who comes frothing at the mouth. This is my philosophy, take it or be damned to hell. But I don't know who's going to hell, you or me. I have no idea. How can they preach that? And again, the way he deals it is the same in all philosophy, right? I mean, how does the Gita's chapters end?
Correct.
He doesn't say, I will hammer the hell out of you if you don't do what I say. He says, you heard it. Now you decide as you deem fit. And only if you accept something philosophically, so it will stay with you in the bad times as well. If I enforce a thought on you, it will stay with you till it is challenged by another thought. So, वो नहीं गजल थी जगजीत सिंह वाली ही, मौन समर्पण में भी तो विद्रोह पनपता रहता है.
But coming back to this book and you as a human being, so you started work on the book. As I asked you earlier, there must have been compulsive choices to make in terms of what to leave out. But also you would have had to do a lot of reading. How did you equip yourself for that? Because as you say, and rightly so, Vivekananda wrote on multifarious subjects. He was not linear. He was not, unilateral in his approach. He was a commentator on life and every vicissitude of life, every hue of life. So when you approached Vivekananda between the age of 17 and the time of the book, how did you actually intellectualize and approach in order to write the book?
I didn't. It's like, I remember, reading this interaction about Shahid Afridi some years back when he was, that young kid hitting 17 ball 50s.
Correct.
And I remember on the sports page of the paper, somebody asking the coach of the Pakistani team, so how do you brief Shahid when he goes out to bat? He says, I never brief him. That will change the way he thinks. The way he's going, he's scoring very well. I mean, he's Afridi, right? So anyway, so it's a bit like that. I have not, the point is so that there's no pressure. Since I am not a religious person, I don't earn my bread and butter by saying, hey, listen to my views. I can afford to cater to nobody. So if the book doesn't sell a single copy, notionally speaking. No loss to me, no hit to my vanity, because that's the world I come from, mentally speaking. So I haven't gone to structure it. I have gone back basically to what I highlighted, marked, circled, read. I have gone back and read only that. What stayed with me for 20 years, only that I have come back and read. I have not tried to read beyond, which never appealed to me. So I pretend I bring all this to you. I'm not. Only what I can recite by memory, I'm bringing it to you. This I understand.
So obviously, you have used interpretative skills of yours in deconstructing Vivekananda. Because, as you said, you have borrowed obviously from what the man said and what he believed in, and then you deconstructed it. You have also said in this conversation earlier that you did it because you thought that there were many life lessons or life's lessons that you could garner from a man like Vivekananda. When you finished writing the book, and this is a dilemma many authors have, did you believe that you were at the end of it, or you could have written more, and what made you stop?
I think what the profession I work in has taught me is not to write a word more than the reader can endure.
Yeah.
That's one takeaway. And the other is that length, gravitas, and depth. Soil writing more and more beyond a topic is finally exercise in vanity.
Yeah.
And I mean, how many times we have seen movies where we say this director made a great picture, had he kept half an hour shorter, it would have been a good movie. But if you say, I wish it had been a little longer, that's a good movie, right? So when you are in doubt about this, it's better to cut it. Also, one thing, and this is just it's a narration and it's not about the book. Towards the end of it, I had a chat with a colleague from publishing, a person who had also at one point said, maybe he was interested in a similar topic. Finally, I did Bloomsbury, but I had chats with people earlier who read my writings. And he was saying, your writing style is changing, even as you're writing the book, because that itself took 3 to 4 years, the basic structure of it. And towards the end of the book, I acknowledged that part, Suhel, when I wrote the key takeaway, that over time, the needs to refer to him all the time began to reduce slightly. And over time, my tone began to become slightly less deferential.
Because you internalized.
I wrote a small article earlier saying why I don't follow Vivekananda anymore. And people who didn't read the article, as happens, began to abuse me online, saying, you man, he made you, and now you're out. Why you don't follow him anymore, you radical individual, whatever the thing.
Because he's in you.
Read the copy, yes. And also, the point is, and so I had this chat with some friends one day, and that's where the thought came, and I wrote it down, that an average teacher needs you to be at his feet all your life, because he teaches you and you never match up to him. It's like the whole managerial point, right? First-rate managers bring first-rate managers, second-rate managers bring third-rate managers. Correct. Because they feel superior. So you realize when you internalize him, the reflex of following begins to diminish. The reflex to fall at his feet every morning begins to diminish, because you say, what is the need to follow anybody intellectually or emotionally? So I said, the absolute success of a master in training is to make you outgrow the need for his training any further.
Make you independent.
Yes. So I said, at this stage, let me write it before I say who needs to write about it. Quickly, let me finish it and give it.
So it's interesting. As we wind down, I'm just conscious of the time. It's very commendable. It's also very tough. At times, it's very frightening to have a book on Vivekananda as one of your first few author experiences. Because for 2 reasons that you mentioned. Number one, mistakenly, he is seen more on religion than on spirituality or free thought. Second is, then you become typecast, not as a Sanghi or non-Sanghi, liberal, non-liberal. I'm not getting into that. Now, another book of yours is coming out, which is pure fiction. And that should be out in 3-4 months. Any inspiration from Vivekananda's life lessons in that? In terms of characterization, the way characters think. The reason why I'm saying is, a lot of Shakespeare's political tragedies, whether it's Macbeth, whether it's Othello, Caesar, they inspired a lot of other stuff around the fictional realm. That's what I'm asking.
So the fictional personality in my work of fiction is, in his real life, when he wrote about his life, he said, at 15, Vivekananda entered my life and everything was turned upside down.
So there is a link.
So there is a link.
See? I mean, even without, you just mentioned it to me in passing, and I suspected कि एक यहाँ कोई सूत्रधार होगा जिसने विवेकानंद की फिलॉसफी को कैरी फॉरवर्ड किया है.
Yeah, because to think like him, I have to think from that frame of mind.
That's
radical
it.
decisions.
In fact, I like what you said, that you didn't have to be deferential and you didn't have to follow him, or you unfollowed him because he was already part of you.
He was not deferential to Ramakrishna. If you look at
Correct.
that.
No, I'm saying when you said you were no longer deferential, or when you wrote that article saying I've unfollowed, it wasn't out of disrespect. It was actually out of greater respect
to me, not on a pedestal above me.
So I'm saying it's a greater respect to the man, because he then becomes your fellow traveler. He's not someone who's imposing himself on you.
Even in our philosophy, Suhel, I don't know why this is not more common in the way we handle our icons, because I go as far back as the bhajans playing at NCC camp, मतलब पितुमातु सहायक स्वामी सखा. तो स्वामी के बाद सखा भी है, तुम स्वामी भी क्यों जाते हो? स्वामी विवेकानंद है, बट सखा भी तो हो सकता है. मतलब आपको जरूरी थोड़ी पैर में बैठे रहना.
No, you're right. Sadly in India, our icons are either relegated to very badly written books, other than the ones they write, of course, or they're relegated to statues. And the only people who benefit from statues are pigeons. But we have no idea of transmitting the enormous wealth of knowledge, the enormous wealth of cultural indexation, content. We've kind of, I know it sounds pretty weird, but I think somewhere we've lost the plot as a nation in terms of our cultural moorings. ये तो आप अभी भी विवेकानंद की बात कर रहे हैं. The enormous contribution to Indian culture and literature from the south of our country has completely been ignored. Completely.
True.
You don't even talk about that contribution. You don't even talk about how political leaders today, we say politics is about religion, but MGR and Karunanidhi was a self-professed agnostic. So, we don't go to those places at all. But Anshul, I have to say, this is a very interesting conversation. For all of those of you who are watching and will continue to watch, because this will come on multiple platforms, this is an important book, not because the author is sitting here, and it's not even important because it's about Vivekananda. It's important because at times in life, no matter how confident you are, no matter you're the perfect captain of that perfect ship, you still need a rudder which is anchored, not just in experience, but to my mind, in cerebral depth. What Vivekananda has given to the world, and not just to India, and Anshul talks about that, to my mind, is a great cerebral mirror. A mirror you can look into, you can either learn from it, or reflect, or introspect. So in many ways, he has established and created this troika to learn, reflect, and introspect. And that's exactly what Anshul's book is. So thank you, Anshul. Thank you for this placid talk. I told you this is not like one of those television shows where there'll be shouting and debate and where I will speak more than you. No.
Thank you for that.
I'm delighted that you were part of this, and thank you to Advaita for enabling her platform. And that's it. You have a splendid evening. Stay safe and God bless you. And thank you for giving this gift to people, and people should seriously enjoy this gift and use it to their fullest.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
sir. Thanks so much.